Craftsman days are here at Lowe's with big savings on the tools you need. Save $100 on the Craftsman V26 Tool Power Tool Combo Kit, now at $199. No matter what the project is, Craftsman's high-quality, high-performance products empower you to build on. Visit Lowe's and check out the full line of Craftsman tools today. Valid through 7/9 while supplies last. Selection varies by location. Maximum initial battery voltage measured without a workload is 20 volts. Nominal voltage is 18.
Hey everyone, Amber here. I'm taking a little time off this week, but I didn't want to leave your feed empty. So today I'm bringing you a special guest episode from my friend Josh over at the Wild West Extravaganza. If you've ever been curious about the stranger-than-fiction stories of the Old West, Josh is your guy. He's got a knack for digging into history's outlaws, lawmen, and everything in between. This episode is all about Blackjack Ketchum, a train robber with a flair for the dramatic and a name that sounds like he walked out of a spaghetti western. Let's just say his life and especially his death are not easily forgotten. So sit back and enjoy this wild tale from the Wild West Extravaganza. I'll be back in your ears in 2 weeks.
When they executed Blackjack Ketchum, he only had one arm left. Had he had both, or somehow figured out how to shoot with his left hand, things may have turned out a bit different. As it were, Ketchum remained defiant until the end, marching to the gallows and telling the sheriff to hurry up because he was due in hell for dinner. And what happened next sent a throng of onlookers running in terror. Who was Blackjack Ketchum? What caused him to become an outlaw? What happened to his arm, and what exactly occurred on the day of his execution that would haunt those in attendance for the rest of their lives? Stick around and find out. My name's Josh, and this is the Wild West Extravaganza. Thomas Edward Ketchum was born in San Saba County, Texas on October 31st, 1863. His parents arrived back in 1849 looking to raise cattle, a move that most definitely came with a price. Two of Tom's uncles were killed by the Kickapoo in 1867. His father, Green, passed away the following year, and his mother, Temperance, would do the same in 1873. In other words, Tom was an orphan before he was even old enough to shave. Thankfully, his older brother, Barry, offered to take him in, for a while at least. You see, young Tom had a bit of a wild streak. His first known brush with the law came in March of 1880 when he was held in contempt of court. The details are murky, as are the consequences, but it does appear that at just 16 years of age, Tom Ketchum was already starting to buck authority. It was around the same period that he allegedly got caught stealing pecans from a neighbor. Said neighbor delivered a thorough ass whooping, so Tom returned with dynamite and blew up the entire grove. Legend has it that he also shot a fellow teenager with birdshot following a similar dispute. And as to how true these stories are, I really can't say. It's also unclear at what point Tom graduated from being a teenage nuisance to a full-fledged outlaw. We do know that he spent a good chunk of his youth working cattle, though, both for his older brother Barry and on neighboring spreads with another brother named Sam. According to Tom's biographer, Jeff Burton, there's not much in the way of evidence showing that Ketchum was involved with stock theft prior to around the year 1884. But get involved he would. And when his name suddenly appeared on an indictment right alongside that of his brother Sam, they both wisely chose to flee San Saba for greener pastures, which in their case just meant the town of San Angelo. Ah, the good old days, back when you could easily escape serious legal troubles just by moving a mere 100 miles away. I wonder if Diddy ever thought of that. And yeah, for the next couple of years, Tom and Sam continued working cattle there in Tom Green County, as well as helping out in roundups as far south as El Dorado. And at some point, they drifted north into Utah's Snake Valley and started a ranch of their own. And I do use the term ranch rather loosely. Once again, per Jeff Burton, quote, most of the time they were away from the valley trading in livestock stolen from others. When they were at home, they were hosts to such hard characters as Tom McCarty and Willard Christensen, alias Matt Warner, a pair of thieves who later carried out a number of audacious bank robberies in Colorado, Oregon, and Washington. Mr. Burton further states in his book Dynamite and Six Shooter, quote, in a year or so, the climate or paucity of the prophets, or perhaps even the inquisitiveness of the law, persuaded the brothers to withdraw from Snake Valley. By the close of 1888, they were back in Tom Green County, end quote. And yeah, the brothers may have been back in Texas, but they would not stay long. Apparently, Tom thought it would be a good idea to rile a dog up and chase it into a crowded church. The congregation, however, failed to see the humor, and Tom was taken into custody. Just so happens that Big Brother Barry was engaged to the arresting officer's sister, so in the early part of 1889, once Tom was released, he and Sam were once again on the move. I guess Barry didn't want their activities affecting his marital prospects. The brothers ended up working cattle in the Panhandle for a while. Tom trailed herds from New Mexico to Oklahoma, and by all accounts, he and Sam were just hard-working, law-abiding cowboys. At least they were until Tom went and got his heart broke. And this tends to be the case, it was all of his own doing. Now at the time, Ketchum was working for an outfit out of Lincoln County. Had him a lady there that he was sweet on, but at the same time, he was also dragging his feet when it came to making an honest woman out of her. Each time he would leave to go on a cattle drive, he would claim that it would be his last. Promised he'd save his money and that they'd get married. And each time he returned, he was dead broke and full of excuses. Finally, one day she had enough. As Tom was getting ready to leave for another drive, she started crying on his shoulder, swearing that she'd wait on him and saying that she could never love another. Then no sooner was Tom gone that she went and got eloped. Ketchum wouldn't learn of this betrayal until the herd got to Clayton, at which point he abruptly drew his wages and quit, saying he was headed for the hole in the wall up in Wyoming. Now, it's anyone's guess as to whether or not he made it that far north. Matter of fact, nobody truly knows what Tom was up to directly after quitting that herd. He would head back to Texas just a few months later, though. His brother Sam had recently returned to San Angelo and went partners there in a saloon with another young cowboy by the name of Will Carver. And yeah, this is the same Will Carver who would go on to ride with Butch and Sundance. If you've ever seen that famous Wild Bunch photo where they're all dressed to the nines, that's Carver standing in the back left. Another friend of the Ketchums during this same period was Dave Atkins. And as fate would have it, it was Dave, not Carver, who assisted Tom in killing his first man. Or I guess I should say his first known killing. The victim, Jasper Powers, was gunned down in a horse pasture on December 12, 1895. And per usual, stories do vary as to why. Some think that Jasper owed money to Sam Ketchum and Will Carver, and it was they who put Tom up to the killing. Others think that Powers was stealing cattle from the aforementioned Dave Atkins. And that may be true, but the most plausible theory, in my opinion, the one with the most legs, is that Jasper's wife was having an affair with the ranch foreman. They wanted Jasper gone, so the foreman paid Tom to make it happen. Either way, and for whatever reason, Jap Powers was dead, and Tom Ketchum was once again on the run. And so was pretty much everyone else in his purview, even those not suspected of taking part in the murder. Guess they didn't want to be found guilty by association. Carver and Atkins lit out for Cochise County, Arizona, as Tom and Sam took refuge on the Bell Ranch over in New Mexico, just on the outskirts of Fort Bascom. Of course, they'd end up calling it quits just a week later after Tom got in an argument with one of the bosses. And in lieu of a severance, they butchered one of the Bell steers and stole provisions from the ranch storehouse. Then just a few days later, on June 10th, they robbed another store over in the town of Liberty. The shopkeep, Levi Herstein, was nice enough to let the Ketchums use his store/post office to wait out a storm. And they repaid his kindness by making off with a bunch of supplies and $45 in cold, hard cash. So the following day, Herstein formed a small posse, caught up with the brothers round about noon, and once again, there are different versions as to what occurred next. But they do all end with Herstein and one of his men lying dead in the dirt. One story goes that Tom and Sam acted like they were surrendering, and whenever Herstein got close, they shucked iron and commenced shooting. Another has it that the posse simply rode into an ambush. Now, there was a survivor, a wounded man playing possum, who would later claim that one of the brothers, either Tom or Sam, he wasn't sure which, stood over Herstein's body and emptied his revolver into it, while repeatedly yelling, "You son of a bitch, you son of a bitch." And while we don't know for certain which one of the Ketchums this was, I do think Tom is the most likely candidate. Turns out he was prone to such outbursts, as well as a little self-flagellation. How do you like that word? Self-flagellation. Google it. But yeah, it's like the time a few years prior when he failed to properly hobble his horse. When Tom awoke the next morning and discovered that his pony was gone, according to a former colleague, he began stalking around camp, cursing loudly at himself and banging his own revolver against his head. Then on another occasion, when Tom was spurned by that girl that I mentioned earlier, one of his fellow hands found him, quote, pulling out his hair and cursing like a sailor, end quote. So yeah, I'm no psychologist by any means, but if you're going to pistol whip yourself and pull your own damn hair out, I don't find it all that unlikely that you'd also empty a gun into a dead man while screaming obscenities. Something tells me that if Tom was around nowadays, he'd be punching holes in the wall every time he starts losing at fantasy football. Look, I'm not saying that Blackjack Ketchum was totally insane, but as you'll soon learn, at the very least, he did have a few screws loose. Now, following the killing of Herstein, he and his brother stole some horses from a nearby ranch and went their separate ways. Sam would go on to find legit, albeit temporary, employment north of Engle, New Mexico, as Tom headed west to Arizona. It's there where he'd reunite with Carver and Atkins, and come that spring, the trio headed back to Texas to rob themselves a train. Oh yeah, here we go. Getting to the good stuff now. The crime in question occurred on May 14th, 1897, some 15 miles west of Langtree. Dave Atkins cut the telegraph lines as Tom and Carver climbed on board and forced the engineer to hit the brakes. They then headed to the express car and blew the safes open with dynamite, making off with an estimated $42,000 worth of plunder, or damn near $1.5 million in today's money. Not sure how much of that they were able to enjoy, though. According to Jeff Burton, quote, most of the money unspent was left behind, either cached somewhere in Tom Green County or deposited for safekeeping with Barry or some other ally. Their intention may have been to lie undercover for a while to collect the money when they deemed that they could comfortably get out with it to some distant place where they were unknown, end quote. So yeah, not really sure if they ever did retrieve that money, and to be honest, I do question whether or not it was really 42 grand. Either way, it does appear as if they were broke just a few months later and looking for another score. That being the case, on the night of September 3rd, 1897, they boarded the southbound train at Folsom. Waited till they were a few miles outside of town, made the engineer stop the train, and just like before, they blew the safes open with dynamite. Wasn't near as lucrative as the last haul, though. All they got for their troubles was around $3 grand, along with an assortment of jewelry and silver eating utensils. Oh, and just an FYI, back in those days, in the 1890s, robbing a train in New Mexico was punishable by death, something that Tom wouldn't learn until it was far too late. We'll get to that soon enough, but for now, the boys would lay over for a spell in Cochise County. They had a nice little hideout there, a veritable fortress northeast of Benson, in a place called Texas Canyon. A local ranch hand would describe the hideout as follows. You could not have dragged them out of there with a locomotive. At the head of the canyon, the basin widens out into what was known as the Wildcat. Above the Wildcat was a great bluff and many, many rocks, so wild and steep that no one could possibly climb from that side. Well, the cowboys would hobble their horses and leave them there, then climb up to the right and circle clear around the bluff over some almost impassable country and reach the top, almost over the Wildcat. Here, there was a series of caves and great boulders dividing the top of the bluff into rooms. One of these they called the kitchen and had their cookout fit there. Then there was the parlor and the bedroom. They could go out on the bluff itself and with a glass and see all over the country in all directions. They brought water up in 5-gallon cans from a spring about a half-mile away. This hideout has been used by many outlaws as it is very inaccessible. Now and then, some of us cowpunchers would go in there and bring out a maverick. But what few cattle were in there were wild. It was pert near out of this world. End quote. Not gonna lie, sounds like a pretty cool little clubhouse. Only problem was, gang member Dave Atkins ended up blowing their cover. He left the canyon one day alone, proceeded to get drunk near Bisbee, and start blabbing about their previous robberies. He even bragged that they were planning on holding up another train just across the border at Steins Pass. As you can imagine, Tom wasn't all that happy with Dave's indiscretions. A situation made even worse when he learned that Texas Rangers had taken to hiding out in the express cars, hoping to catch him in the act. So instead of going to Steins Pass, they drifted south to Old Mexico, hiding out in northern Chihuahua, possibly with the remnants of the infamous High Five Gang. Now, I have not touched on this just yet, but there was another outlaw known as Blackjack, real name William Christian. He and his brother Bob were the leaders of the High Fives, and they also happened to bear a very strong resemblance to Tom and Sam Ketchum. So much so that folks started getting them mixed up. Hell, it was the Christian brothers who were initially blamed for Herstein's murder back in June of 1896. And when William was finally put under by law enforcement in April of 97, his body was erroneously identified as Tom Ketchum. And even after that, his gang, the High Fives, would continue using his name while committing robberies. So far as the law was concerned, Tom Ketchum was dead and Blackjack Christian was alive and well, when in reality it was the exact opposite. Tom would later claim that he met the real Blackjack, possibly at some point in 1896, and that he turned down an offer to join his gang. No idea whether or not that's true, but that is the long and short of how Ketchum came to be known as Black Jack. Now, as I alluded to earlier, Tom and the boys had previously planned to hold up that train at Steins Pass, about 20 miles southwest of present-day Lordsburg, New Mexico. The only thing that stopped him was Dave Atkins and his big mouth, coupled with rumors of armed guards on the express cars. But I suppose by December of 1897, they figured the heat had died down enough to go ahead and give it the old college try. And while they were able to steal around $11 from the station agent, the train itself proved far more difficult. Guards were waiting, as rumored, and when the gang tried to force their way inside, said guards opened fire. During the gunfight that ensued, gang member Ed Cullen was shot dead, as Tom and the others were forced to flee empty-handed. Fun fact, there are some who think that the dead man, Ed Cullen's real name was Ed Bullion, the brother of the lady outlaw Laura Bullion. But as it turns out, that's probably not true. Laura only had one brother, Daniel, and he lived all the way till 1975. That said, there is another connection between Laura and Black Jack. Another member of the gang, Will Carver, was previously married to Laura's aunt. And when she passed away, he and a still teenage Laura struck up a relationship of their own. And in time, she'd also be romantically involved with another outlaw you may have heard of, known as Ben Kilpatrick. Now, after that failed robbery, the gang returned to Cochise County to lick their wounds. Once again, according to Jeff Burton, they, quote, hid out mostly in the Swiss Helm Mountains or in the Wildcat. Outwardly, at least, they were still welcome with the cowpunchers, prospectors, and small ranchers. The only man whom they regarded as a menace was John Slaughter, owner of the San Bernardino Ranch and sometime sheriff. One day, while the gang was passing time at a cabin near Mud Spring in Sulphur Spring Valley, the conversation touched upon Slaughter. Tom Ketchum glared balefully and said, "Let's go down and kill that rat-headed son of a bitch." But before they had made up their minds what to do, Slaughter himself drove up in a buggy. Seeing the four bad men lounging outside, he handed the reins to Mrs. Slaughter and ostentatiously rested his shotgun across his knees. As he passed by, he looked them over, as if to dare them to make trouble. The outlaw said nothing until the rig was out of sight. Finally, one of them remarked dryly, "Well, there he is, fellers. If you want him, go get him." Tom Ketchum, it turns out, did not want him that badly after all. End quote. So yeah, apparently old Tom wasn't the mean little ass kicker that he thought he was. But then again, a man would have to be a fool not to at least be a little scared of someone like John Slaughter. Later on that spring, the gang was dead broke again, so they slipped back into Texas and robbed the number 20 between Langtree and Del Rio. This is the same exact locomotive that they had attempted to hold up just 5 months prior at Steins Pass. And luckily for them, this time, things did go as planned. As was their MO, they blew the safes open with dynamite and made off with all the cash before Johnny Law even knew they was there. 2 months later, on July 1st, they struck again, this time holding up a westbound train outside of Stanton, Texas. And as it turns out, this would be the last robbery they'd commit together as a gang. After the heist, they sought refuge up in Wyoming at the Hole in the Wall. And legend has it that while Butch Cassidy got along well with Carver, he couldn't stand the Ketchums, Tom especially. And it does look as if Butch may not have been the only one. Although details are sparse, all signs point to Tom and his brother Sam having some sort of a falling out. Not sure exactly what happened. Some tend to think that it was Tom's ever-increasing erratic behavior, but by the summer of 1899, the brothers had indeed split up. Sam and Carver would head to New Mexico with a gang of their own, including noted outlaws Elsie Lay and Kid Curry. And on July 11th, 1899, they held up a train outside of Folsom, almost in the exact same location as the one that Tom robbed back in September of 97. And although they were successful, a posse would soon catch up with them about 80 miles to the southwest at Turkey Creek Canyon. There were 2 separate gunfights over the course of a 4-day period, and both Lay and Sam Ketchum were wounded and taken prisoner. Sam's wounds became infected, and about a week later, at the age of 45, he passed away. A friend would later state that Sam Ketchum was a brave and courageous man, and if his brother hadn't been such a bad influence, he would have been all right, end quote. Meanwhile, little brother Tom was still alive and well down in Arizona, and apparently feeling a little on the bloody side. In early June, Tom stepped inside a dry goods store at Camp Verde and shot both of the owners deader in hell. And to this day, nobody knows why in the hell he did it. Robbery apparently was not a motive, as he did not rob the store, so I can only assume that it was personal. Either that, or he had finally lost whatever marbles he had to begin with. Tom followed up this double murder by heading east to New Mexico and trying to rob a train all on his lonesome, which in hindsight is probably not the smartest of ideas. To make matters worse, it was the same exact train that his brother Sam and them others just held up, and in damn near the same location. Remember, he still wasn't aware of his brother's fate. And yeah, on the evening of August 16th, 1899, Tom boarded the number 1 over at Folsom Station. He forced the engineer to halt the train about 5 miles outside of town. And when a mail clerk poked his head out to see what was happening, Tom opened fire. His bullet, what he would later claim was a warning shot, ricocheted and struck the clerk in the jaw. And from there, things just went from bad to worse. Turns out robbing a train solo ain't the easiest of jobs. As Tom was arguing with the rail employees, trying to force him to uncouple the express car, here comes the conductor sneaking up from behind and letting loose with a shotgun, shattering Tom's right arm with buckshot in the process. Ketchum returned fire, best he could with a bum arm, but all he managed to do was graze the conductor. Nevertheless, he continued firing as he fell from the train and stumbled to his horse. Of course, by that point, he had lost far too much blood, so rather than jump in the saddle and make a getaway, he instead just lay down by the tracks. He'd later recall, quote, "I tried a dozen times to mount my horse, but was too weak to do it." The next morning, around 8 o'clock, Tom was still laying there by the tracks when he was taken into custody by the sheriff out of Union County. When asked what happened to his arm, Tom stated, "Somebody shot me out of the baggage car last night when I was trying to hold up the train. I wish the son of a bitch had shot me through the head or the heart, and this would have been over with. I hadn't done anything to him, and I don't see what the son of a bitch wanted to shoot me for." He then told the lawman that if only he could shoot with his left hand, then the two of them would have themselves a little fun. As it were, Tom was simply placed in the caboose via stretcher and taken to Folsom. From there, he was escorted via special train to Trinidad, Colorado, and placed in a hospital. Now, why they hauled him all the way to Colorado, I don't fully understand. He'd only spent around a week there before being transferred back to New Mexico. About the only thing of note that occurred in Trinidad was Tom begging a guard for a gun in order to commit suicide. Obviously, the guard didn't give him a gun. And on another occasion, he removed his bandages, tied them around his neck, and tried to strangle himself. That didn't work either, and like I said, he was back in New Mexico by August 23rd. That injured arm of his was amputated on September 3rd, and then once Tom began to regain his strength, he and another prisoner started making plans to escape. They carved a fake revolver out of a piece of wood and covered it with tinfoil to make it look real. They then took the spring out of a clock in order to fashion a saw to cut through the bars. It was all for naught, though, and the guards soon discovered the contraband, causing Tom to reportedly break down crying. Eventually, he was transferred to Las Vegas, New Mexico, not Nevada. Okay, asshole who sent me the very mean email recently trying to correct me. I know Las Vegas, Nevada. I think it was formed in 1905. Anytime you hear me speaking about Las Vegas on this show, I'm talking about Las Vegas, New Mexico. 9 times out of 10, I'm going to be talking about Las Vegas, New Mexico, not Nevada. Okay. Las Vegas, New Mexico, very popular in the Old West. Billy the Kid hung out there. Jesse James hung out there. And apparently Tom Ketchum also spent a little time there. All right. So like I was saying, eventually he was transferred to Las Vegas, New Mexico, where he pleaded guilty to delaying U.S. mails, a crime that carried a maximum sentence of 10 years. That said, the court suspended the sentencing so that the territory of New Mexico could pursue additional charges of attempted train robbery, or what they called the felonious assault upon a railroad, which, if you'll remember, was punishable by death. Truth be told, they were just making an example out of Ketchum. He could have been tried for murder in Texas or even Arizona for that double shooting at Camp Verde. But according to Governor Otero of New Mexico, quote, "Train robberies have been entirely too frequent in our territory to permit this one to go by unnoticed, and I am determined that it must be stopped," end quote. So yeah, like I said, they were just making an example out of him. Now, the trial began in the town of Clayton on September 6, 1900. And by September 11th, Tom was found guilty and sentenced to hang. His original date with the executioner was scheduled for less than a month later, on October 5th. Luckily for him, his lawyers were able to get a couple of postponements, and his rendezvous with the hangman wouldn't occur until April 26th of the following year. In the meantime, Ketchum was remanded to the territorial prison. It's there where his older brother Barry paid him a visit, but Tom refused to see him. And when Barry left money with the warden for the commissary, Tom complained that it wasn't enough. This guy, man. Per Jeff Burton, quote, "During his 21 months in captivity, Tom talked a good deal about himself, his career, and other people. Some of what he said about himself and his career was true, some half true, and some wholly untrue. Much of what he said about others was malicious. On the morning of Friday, April 26, he was still talking. He denied being blackjack and said that a dozen men in Arizona could testify that he was not. End quote. Now, the sheriff there in Union County, Salome Garcia, was placed in charge of the execution. The only problem was Sheriff Garcia had never hanged anyone before. And, well, let's just say mistakes were made, as you'll soon discover. Now, the day before the execution, Tom dined on fried chicken for his last meal, after which he was paid a visit by the priest. When asked if he'd like to make a confession, he replied that he would, so long as the priest also made a confession to him. He then requested a fiddler so they could dance together. No word on whether or not he and the priest ended up cutting a rug. Next day at 1 p.m., Tom was led to the gallows. A throng of onlookers had gathered, but Tom refused to make a statement to him. Instead, when he stepped to the trap door, he asked the sheriff to make sure that his grave was dug, quote, very deep. This was followed by him saying, "Better hurry up, boys, I'm doing hell for dinner," which I'll admit is a pretty badass thing to say when facing death. Not sure that Ketchum actually uttered those words, though. He may have, but other sources do claim that he simply stated, "Hurry up, boys, get this over with." Either way, a noose was then placed around his neck and a black shroud over his head. The shroud was held to his shirt by several pins of the sort used on horse blankets. Sheriff Garcia, who had reportedly been nipping at the bottle all morning, then asked Tom if he was ready. Ketchum replied that he was and then urged Garcia to, quote, "let her go." The sheriff then raised a hatchet, took careful aim, and swung to cut the rope. And he missed. Onlookers began laughing as Garcia struggled to pry it loose from the wooden boards. Finally, at approximately 1:17, he swung again, this time hitting the mark. The rope was cut, the trapdoor fell, and Blackjack Ketchum went a-tumbling. Remember what I said earlier about mistakes being made, though? Turns out the rope was far too long. They had also drastically miscalculated Tom's weight. Apparently, he had put on a few pounds while in prison. So rather than the noose snapping and breaking his neck, Tom instead fell all the way to the ground. As soon as his feet hit the dirt, his body lunged forward as blood began spraying from underneath that hood. Turns out that fall had completely severed Tom's head from his shoulders. The only thing still holding it on was that damn hood that was pinned to his shirt. A photographer was on hand, and if you're curious, you can find photos of Tom standing on the gallows before that sack was placed over his head, and another of him on the ground after the execution, with his head lying next to the body. About an hour later, the head was sewn back on, and Tom was placed in a white coffin. He was then buried with zero fanfare, no minister, no mourners, nothing. Skip ahead 3 decades later, and Ketchum was reinterred to a new cemetery about a half a mile away. And this time there was a ceremony. They even pried the casket open and peered inside, noting how well preserved the body still was. Before they lowered Ketchum into the dirt for the second and final time, flowers were placed on the casket, along with a note that simply read, "To a cowboy who went wrong." Now, his former associate, Will Carver, would go on to help Butch and Sundance rob a bank up in Nevada, only to be gunned down at a Texas bakery a few months later. As for that blabbermouth, Dave Atkins, he'd outlive all of them. Dave evaded capture by joining the British Army, believe it or not, saw action in Africa, after which he just sort of drifted throughout Mexico and South America. Ended up returning to Texas in the year 1911, where he was recognized and arrested. He was found guilty of murder, but only given a 5-year sentence. Basically just a slap on the wrist. But I guess God had other plans. Not really sure what he got up to after being released, but by the 1930s, he was in a mental hospital. And it's there he remained until his death in 1964. And I guess that's about all I've got on Blackjack Ketchum. My primary source when it came to research was the book Dynamite and Six Shooter, the story of Thomas E. Blackjack Ketchum by Jeff Burton. There's also a pretty lengthy essay written by Mr. Burton that originally appeared in the February 2002 edition of Wild West with more updated information. Link down below if you're curious. I did read F. Stanley's book, No Tears for Blackjack Ketchum, but I'll be honest, I did feel like it was a little bit outdated. All right, please hit me up at josh@wildwestextra.com. Let me know what you think. And remember, ad-free episodes are available on Patreon. Patreon.com/Wild West Extra. All content on Patreon is ad-free, and you gain early access to all new episodes. Oh, and did I mention that 20% of all proceeds from Patreon go directly to charity? So not only will you be supporting the show, but you'll also be helping those in need. That's patreon.com/Wild West Extra. All right, we'll be back next week with brand new material. In the meantime, try not to pull your hair out, okay? Don't get all butthurt when the girl you've been stringing along finally gets tired of your shit. And whatever you do, don't go trying to rob a train all by yourself. Your conductors can be feisty. All right, till next week, adios.